It was a Thursday evening in Richmond when the rain began to tap against my kitchen window, like it always did before something went wrong. I had just come back from work, my shoes still damp from the parking lot puddle outside my apartment complex. The air smelled like wet asphalt and cheap coffee. I placed my Aldi bags on the counter and started unpacking groceries, eggs, oatmeal, a pack of chicken thighs on sale. The fluorescent light hummed above me, steady, harmless. My life was predictable until my phone lit up with one message that made the air feel heavier. Sign the loan for me. It's just family. It was from my sister Sloane. There wasn't even a greeting, just entitlement dressed as affection. I stared at the words as if they were written in bold red ink. The number attached to it made my stomach twist. $150,000. I wiped my hands on a towel, read it again, and almost laughed. Sloane had always been dramatic, but this wasn't drama. This was calculated. Attached to her message was a photo, her studio mood board. Strings of fairy lights, fake leather chairs that looked like Eames knockoffs, a slogan printed across the wall, ROI in 3 months. It wasn't business. It was fantasy. A minute later, another notification appeared. Mom. A video call. I hesitated, then answered. Her face filled the screen, haloed by the warm kitchen light I'd seen since childhood. Sweetheart, she began with that syrupy tone she saved for manipulation. Your sister just needs a signature. You make 6 figures, don't you? It'll look good for both of you. I bit my lip. 6 figures. She said it like it was a fact she'd invented. I made $68,000 before taxes, and I had just received a $75 fine from the HOA for putting my trash out on the wrong day. I could feel the irritation throb behind my ribs. Mom, I can't, I said quietly. It's not my loan. Her smile faltered. Don't make your sister feel small. She's finally trying to build something. She ended the call before I could reply. I stared at the phone, its black screen reflecting my face, expressionless but simmering. On the counter, the Dominion energy bill sat unopened beside a Zelle request from last week, $48 gas from Mom. My Costco card had been charged $312 for candles and decor, Sloane's idea of studio investment. Every line of my budget had someone else's fingerprint on it. I opened the family group chat and typed one word, no. It was the first time in 27 years I had written that word to them. Within seconds, the chat exploded. Don't forget who helped you, Mom wrote. It's about loyalty, Dad added, though he hadn't paid a bill in my name in a decade. Then Sloane chimed in, it's just family, Tara. You're making this ugly. Tyler, her boyfriend, jumped in too. You're just a calculator with legs. My chest tightened. The insult wasn't even clever, but it cut, because it was true I had become the math behind everyone else's mistakes. I put the phone down, letting it buzz itself to exhaustion. Outside, the rain thickened into a steady rhythm against the glass. I poured hot water into a mug, added a tea bag, and watched the steam rise. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the edge of something breaking. The phone buzzed again, another text this time, from an unknown number. Be an adult. We'll explain it in person. I frowned. And then came the sound that made the hairs on my neck stand straight. Knock, knock, knock. 3 steady hits against the front door. I turned toward the peephole, my hand trembling just enough to feel it. Through the fisheye glass, a figure stood hood up, soaked jacket shoes, leaving small puddles on the welcome mat. Tyler. He looked up as if he knew I was watching. His grin didn't reach his eyes. Open up, Tara, he called, voice muffled but sharp. Muffled, but... We'll explain the terms. I didn't move. The mug in my hand felt heavier. Behind him, the rain blurred the world into gray lines. I took one slow breath and pressed the lock again, even though it was already locked. He knocked once more, harder this time, each thud echoing through the floorboards. I whispered to myself, steady but shaking. Tonight I learned what it costs to say no. The words hung in the room like smoke. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched until I could hear the faint whistle of the kettle I had forgotten to turn off. I walked back to the counter, turned the knob, and watched the steam fade. My phone lit up again, a message from Mom this time. Don't overreact. He just wanted to talk. I set the phone face down, feeling the pulse in my throat slow but heavy. Talk, I repeated under my breath. No, they didn't want to talk. They wanted compliance. I stared at the Dominion bill again, then at the rain-soaked world outside. In that quiet kitchen, I realized something that hurt more than the fear. Family debt wasn't just money, it was obedience. That night, I didn't reply. I didn't open the door. I just sat there watching the water drip from the edge of my counter, cooling around my untouched groceries. I had spent years believing that keeping the peace meant keeping everyone else afloat. But peace built on guilt was just another kind of bill waiting to come due. Richmond mornings always smelled faintly of rain and coffee, and mine began like any other Saturday. I laced up my old running shoes and headed toward Bird Park, where the path circled the lake under a gray November sky. Jogging there cleared my mind, or at least helped me pretend it could be cleared. I thought about groceries my rent payment due next week and how my checking balance had already dropped lower than it should have. I was 27, still paying off a modest condo on the south side of town. Every dollar was planned, labeled, and spoken for. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I got back home, sweat cooling under my jacket, I opened my laptop to pay bills. Dominion Energy Comcast, HOA dues. It was the same rotation every month. But that morning, the Comcast line made me pause. $89. Again. I scrolled down the list and saw 10 identical withdrawals. 10 months in a row. My stomach tightened. That account was supposed to have been closed when Mom moved the internet plan out of my name last year. She had said, "Just let me use your account for a month until I set up the new one." Apparently, the month had stretched indefinitely. I texted her, "Mom, Comcast is still charging me. Can you check if it's under my name?" No response. A few minutes later, she sent a voice note instead of words, the kind she liked when avoiding guilt. "Oh, honey, maybe they forgot to switch it. I'll look later." She never did. I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch because it was cheaper than anything else, and watched the crumbs fall across my laptop keyboard. The little things I did to stay afloat always seemed invisible to them. At work, my coworkers joked about brunches and weekend getaways. I kept quiet because my idea of splurging was replacing the air filter on time. That evening, Mom called to invite me for dinner at Lee's famous recipe chicken. Family dinners were always noisy, filled with laughter that sounded cheerful to outsiders and slightly cruel to those who knew better. I arrived late and squeezed into the booth beside my father. The smell of fried chicken and biscuits clung to everything. Sloan was already in full performance mode, telling everyone about her creative studio plans. "We're hiring freelancers soon," she said, flipping her hair. "Creating jobs, you know." Then she turned to me and smiled like it hurt. Tara doesn't really understand entrepreneurship. She's more of a calculator type. The table burst into laughter. Even Mom giggled behind her napkin. I forced a smile and reached for my sweet tea. Dad added, "Your sister's out there building something real. You could learn a little risk-taking from her." I wanted to say I already take risks every time you all borrow from me, but I stayed silent. The sound of their laughter filled the booth like smoke, thick and hard to breathe through. Between bites, Mom slid her phone toward me. "Can you order me an Uber home later? My app's acting up." I sighed and opened the app on my phone. She had said the same thing before. When I scrolled through my trip history later that night, I counted 17 rides charged to my account in the last few months. 17. Each one labeled Mom, each one forgotten. The next morning, I decided to check my finances properly. I opened Credit Karma, the one app that told the truth even when no one else did. My score was steady, but there it was a new hard inquiry from a furniture store downtown. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had ever stepped inside that store. I hadn't. The inquiry listed my home address, the same one I'd kept private, except for family forms and old bills. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. Someone had used my information. I thought of Sloan and her endless Pinterest boards of dream studios. I thought of Tyler with his smug grin and the way he always called me numbers. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. Later that day, I went through my bank statements line by line. There it was again. Costco purchases, candles, frames, seasonal decor, all under my add-on card that Sloan promised to use for supplies. There were no receipts for lumber paint or anything resembling real materials, just things that made her rented loft look photogenic for social media. I took screenshots of everything and saved them in a folder named Family Expenses. It was a joke at first. By the time I was done, it no longer felt funny. That week, I started to notice small shifts. Mom asked in a sweeter voice than usual if I could pay her phone bill just until her next check. Dad mentioned that Sloan had applied for another business loan, but needed a co-signer who looked responsible. Every word felt like a setup. The next Friday, I came home to find another Dominion Energy notice slipped under my door, late fee $9.27. It wasn't much, but the irony made me laugh out loud. I was paying their luxuries and risking my own lights being cut off. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the bill, thinking about how easily kindness had turned into a trap. That night, I opened my email to an alert from my credit card company, unusual activity detected. The purchase was small, $36 at a home decor store I had never heard of. The shipping address matched mine exactly. I knew that store. It was the same one from the hard inquiry. My breath came shallow anger curling under my skin. I called the number on the back of my card, reported it, and froze my account. The agent on the phone said, "We'll investigate, ma'am. You'll get a letter in 7 to 10 business days." She didn't know that the person responsible probably shared my last name. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window made me flinch. I wasn't scared of thieves. I was scared of relatives. Around midnight, I started typing a list. Comcast, Costco, Uber, Dominion Furniture Store. It was messy, written on the back of an old envelope, but it felt like control returning in small letters. I circled the total $27,480. Money I hadn't meant to give pieces of myself, scattered across years of quiet guilt. The next morning, the sun came out, briefly shining through the blinds in thin gold lines. I brewed cheap coffee and stood by the window looking out at the empty street. People walked their dogs, the world kept moving. I opened the group chat muted since that night and scrolled through messages I hadn't read. Photos of brunch jokes about family loyalty, another tag from Sloan's post, grateful for those who believe in me. She had posted it the same day my card was charged. I typed one sentence and deleted it before sending. The truth didn't need to be announced yet. I just needed to know it. That afternoon, I took a walk around the block, stopped by the small hardware store near my building, and bought a thick folder. I labeled it Receipts. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every quiet rebellion begins with proof. Thanksgiving in Church Hill always carried the same scent of cinnamon candles and reheated casseroles. This year, Mom insisted the dinner be held at Aunt June's house because it had better lighting for photos. By 4 in the afternoon, the dining table was crowded with food and family laughter bouncing off the old walls. I stood near the window, balancing a plate of turkey and mashed potatoes, pretending to listen while my aunt talked about how family is everything. I smiled when expected, nodded at the right moments, and counted the minutes until I could leave. I had almost managed to disappear into the background when Sloan arrived late as always, wearing an oversized hat and a smile that screamed performance. "Sorry, traffic," she said, even though she lived 15 minutes away. Tyler followed, carrying a bottle of cheap wine that still had the store sticker on it. He grinned at me as he set it down. "For the family banker," he said. The joke landed flat, but he laughed anyway. After dinner, someone suggested we play What Are You Thankful For This Year? It was a tradition that started when Grandma was alive. Each person had to share one thing they were grateful for. I used to like that game. This time I felt the air tighten as it went around the table. When it reached Sloan, she clasped her hands dramatically. "I'm thankful for dreams," she said, "and for the people who help make them possible." Her gaze drifted toward me like a spotlight. I swallowed hard. She reached into her bag and pulled out several envelopes, gold-trimmed with sisters written on them in cursive. "Just a little surprise," she said. "A fun project." She passed one to me and one to our cousin. My name was written in her loopy handwriting, hearts dotting the I's. "Open it." she urged. Inside was a document. The first line read, "Loan Application Addendum." My breath hitched. There was a blank space for a co-signer's signature and my full name pre-filled in neat blue ink. I looked up. Sloane beamed. "It's symbolic," she said lightly. "A gesture of faith in family, like signing a good luck card." Around the table, people chuckled, thinking it was some kind of joke. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Tyler raised his glass. "Come on, Tara," he said loudly. "Don't make us wait. You're our mobile bank, right? You'll sign. We promise to pay you back." Laughter rippled through the room. My aunt whispered something to her husband, and they both smiled politely. I stared at the paper. The words blurred, but the tone of the room sharpened, mocking, amused, united against me. "I won't sign," I said finally, my voice low but steady. The laughter faltered. Sloane blinked her smile, freezing into something thin. "It's just a gesture," she said again, but this time her voice had an edge. "You don't trust me?" "No," I said louder this time. "I don't." The room went still. Tyler's chair scraped back as he leaned forward, smirking. "Wow. Guess generosity skips siblings sometimes." Mom tried to laugh it off. "Tara, honey, don't overthink everything. You're single. You've got savings. What's the harm in helping your sister's future?" The heat rose to my face. Every pair of eyes at the table felt like a spotlight. I wanted to explain to list every receipt and every dollar taken from my account, but I knew it would sound petty here under these smiling lights. So I just said, "I've helped enough." Dad's fork clinked against his plate. "Watch your tone." Sloane folded the paper back into the envelope and said sweetly, "You know, maybe I'll find someone who believes in me." She stood dramatic as ever and brushed imaginary dust from her sleeves. I'm grateful for lessons she added loud enough for everyone to hear. The conversation stumbled after that, trying to recover. Someone passed pie, someone changed the subject to football. I sat there in silence, pretending to enjoy the pumpkin spice scent that suddenly made me sick. I thought I had escaped when the plates were cleared, but Mom caught my arm by the door. "You embarrassed her," she hissed quietly. This day was supposed to be special. I met her eyes. "You mean for her," I said. She frowned. "You'll understand when you have your own family. Right now, you just sound selfish." I pulled away before my throat could close around a reply. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I walked toward my car keys, shaking slightly in my hand. My phone buzzed a text from Sloane. "You really made a scene. Maybe next time remember who's always been there for you." I didn't answer. Instead, I scrolled up through her older messages, the ones about just family, the emojis that hid debt behind fake affection. As I started the car, I saw Aunt June standing by her porch, waving goodbye to guests. When she noticed me, she walked closer, her breath forming small clouds in the chill. "Honey," she said softly, glancing toward the house. "I shouldn't say this, but you should check your credit again." My stomach flipped. Why I asked? She looked away. "Sloane mentioned opening a store account last spring. She said she used your address because it was easier for deliveries. Maybe that's nothing. But still." She patted my arm. "You're the smart one, Tara. Keep your papers." Then she smiled the kind of sad smile people give when they know you're about to discover something ugly. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the air sting my face. The city lights blurred as tears I didn't want slid down my cheek. By the time I reached my apartment, the anger had replaced the humiliation. I threw the envelope onto the counter, still sealed, still heavy with the weight of everyone else's expectations. Inside my inbox was another alert: recent address verification requested. My heart thudded. I clicked the link and saw the same furniture store name from last week. It wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The girl looking back wasn't shocked anymore. She looked tired, calculated, methodical. The kind of woman who saved receipts and counted miles because no one else would. That night, I took the envelope, folded it carefully, and slid it into my folder labeled Receipts. I didn't shred it. Evidence deserves to be kept. Tomorrow I would check everything. For now, I whispered the words that had become both promise and warning. I won't sign. They sounded stronger out loud. The days after Thanksgiving felt quieter, but heavier, like the silence that follows a slammed door. I returned to my routine, working late at the office, eating frozen dinners, and trying to forget the laughter that had echoed through Aunt June's dining room. But forgetting was impossible. When my phone kept lighting up with notifications from Zelle, $23 for gas, $16 for a copay, $38 for data overage. Each request had a note attached, written in that same syrupy tone Sloane used when she wanted something. Just until Friday. You're the best. Love you. The amounts were small enough to seem harmless, yet constant enough to feel like erosion. Then one afternoon I received a request for $125 labeled parking ticket mistake. Oops meant my name, not yours. I stared at the screen for a long time. My name was printed right there in the message. I declined it without a word. 5 minutes later, a new one appeared. Same amount, same explanation, except now it read, Mom said you'd help. Decline again. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by half-opened envelopes and bank statements. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I started scrolling back through my transaction history, going all the way to 2019. It was like watching a slow leak that had turned into a flood. Small charges that had felt random now lined up in neat, painful order. Uber, Costco, phone bill, gas, reimbursements that never came back, streaming services, grocery runs that weren't mine. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began typing. 1 column for date, 1 for description, 1 for amount. When I finished, the total glared back at me. $27,480. 4 years of quiet bleeding disguised as generosity. Around 9 that night, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Tyler. Sloane's upset, it began. You're making her feel small. She's the artist. You're the bookkeeper. So, who should sacrifice? My fingers froze over the keyboard. The arrogance in that message made my chest burn. I deleted my reply twice before settling on 3 words. Not me anymore. I pressed send and turned off my phone. The next morning, a letter from my bank arrived. I slid it open with a knife and frowned at the words. Pre-approval denied due to missing wet signature. I hadn't applied for anything. The letter included a form with my name and address printed neatly across the top. Someone had tried to open a new credit line in my name. My pulse quickened. It was subtle, like someone testing a locked door to see if it would open. I knew who would do that kind of testing. That night, I printed out the email alert, the denial letter, and added them to my growing folder, labeled Receipts. The folder had started as a small act of control. Now it was becoming evidence, proof that love without boundaries turns into theft with smiles. I sat back and stared at the folder until the edges blurred. The anger I felt wasn't explosive anymore. It was focused, deliberate. The next morning, I decided it was time for a small shift. Nothing loud, nothing that would start a fight, just small corrections. I logged into my Costco account and removed Sloane's ad on card. It took 2 clicks. Then I logged into Netflix and changed the password. I renamed the shared profile to Pay Your Own Bills. When the new device login email pinged 5 minutes later, I pictured Sloane and Tyler sitting on their couch, remote in hand, watching the cheerful red error message appear on their screen. I smiled into my coffee. For the first time in months, the humor felt clean guiltless. It was a kind of justice that didn't need an audience. That afternoon, Mom called. "Did you change something with Costco?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Sloane's trying to check out." I kept my tone calm. "Yes, I did. It's my account. She can make her own." There was a pause long enough to hear her sigh. "Family helps each other, Tara. Don't be so rigid. Family also learns," I said softly. Maybe this is her turn. Before she could answer, I ended the call. The weekend came and went. My phone filled with messages from Sloane, ranging from polite requests to passive-aggressive jokes. "Hope you're proud of saving a few bucks. Don't forget who changed your diaper. Costco membership expired anyway, LOL." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I took pictures of every message and added them to the folder. Patterns matter, and mine were finally showing. A few days later, I was walking home from the bus stop when I noticed a man standing outside my building. He was holding a clipboard. "Delivery for Tara Quinn," he asked. "From what company?" I asked. "Furniture outlet," he said. "Need a signature." My stomach dropped. I looked at the form and saw the name of the same store from my earlier credit inquiry. "There must be a mistake," I said. He checked the address. "Says this unit exactly. Someone must have ordered under your name." I told him to cancel it immediately and went upstairs shaking. It was one thing to use my credit, another to send goods to my home. That night, I filed an online report for attempted identity theft. I didn't list any names, not yet, just the facts. I couldn't sleep, so I turned on the lamp and opened my laptop again. The spreadsheet glowed in the dim light. The numbers no longer frightened me. They motivated me. I added a new tab titled Actions Taken. Under it, I wrote, "Removed Costco card, changed Netflix password, reported attempted credit use." Next to each, I wrote a small note control restored. It looked like a checklist for rebuilding a spine. The following morning, I went for a run around Bird Park. The cold air burned my lungs, but it helped. I kept thinking about how much of my life had been spent apologizing for being responsible. I remembered Mom saying, "You're lucky, Tara, you don't need anyone to take care of you." It used to sound like a compliment. Now it sounded like a curse disguised as praise. When I got home, my inbox had a new message. It was from the same furniture store. "We have canceled the pending order in red. Please confirm you did not authorize." I replied with one line, "I did not." Then I attached a copy of the credit denial letter for their records. It felt good to leave a trail that led away from me. That night, I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine and sat by the window. The street below was quiet lights reflecting on wet pavement. I thought about all the times I had bailed them out when Sloane's rent was late, when Mom's car insurance lapsed, when Dad's tools were stolen, and somehow my debit card covered replacements. Each memory was a line in that invisible ledger, one I had finally written down. Before going to bed, I picked up my phone and checked the Netflix account again. Someone had created a new profile named Seriously, I Laughed. It was petty, but it reminded me that resistance doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it just needs to be steady. I renamed their profile to Ask First. Then I logged off, closed my laptop, and whispered into the quiet room. Boundaries aren't betrayal. I slept well that night for the first time in months. The first Sunday of December came with bright cold air and the kind of blue sky that makes Richmond look almost forgiving. I drove to the small brick church my mother loved because attendance was not optional. Church, in her words, was where reputations were polished and gossip baptized. The potluck after the service had always been her stage. I walked into the fellowship hall with a casserole I'd actually cooked while Sloane breezed in behind me carrying a large bowl of salad. "Costco special," she said brightly. I recognized the plastic container immediately. My old Costco membership had paid for that batch of greens 2 months ago. Tara should take the first serving, she added loudly. After all, she helped provide it. Laughter sprinkled around the room, a kind of polite cruelty that hid behind church smiles. I pretended not to hear. During the blessing, I caught snippets of whispers. She refused to help her sister. Can you believe that some people forget where they come from? It was like standing in a choir that sang guilt instead of hymns. Mom glided from table to table, her voice honeyed. Family means everything, she said to one couple. Some people are just too focused on themselves these days. Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second. I kept eating my casserole, every bite tasting like cardboard. That afternoon, as I was leaving, Mrs. Carter, one of the older church ladies, patted my shoulder and said, "Don't let pride stand between sisters, dear. You'll regret it later." I smiled tightly and thanked her. I wondered how long it took for my mother's version of the story to travel pew to pew. By the time I got home, I didn't have to wonder anymore. It was already online. The Facebook post appeared just after sunset. Some people forget Blood Sloane had written, underneath a photo of her holding a paintbrush and looking soulful. She hadn't tagged me directly, but the hint was sharp enough to cut. The comments came quickly. Aunt June left a heart emoji. Cousin Lila wrote, "Family helps family." Even Mom chimed in with, "Proud of you for staying true to your dreams." I stared at the screen, my hands cold on the keyboard. The algorithm didn't know it was showing me betrayal dressed as inspiration. I didn't comment. I didn't even click like. I just took a screenshot and filed it under receipts. The next day at work, things took a turn I hadn't expected. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from the receptionist. "A man is asking for you in the parking lot." My stomach sank before I even looked out the window. Tyler was standing by my car, leaning against the hood like he owned it. I walked downstairs and kept my distance. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He smiled, that same patronizing curve of his mouth. "Just thought we could talk. Family stuff. You've been ignoring everyone." I crossed my arms. "You shouldn't be here." "Relax," he said. "I'm not a threat. I just want to clear things up. Sloane's hurting. She's not the only one," I said. "Now leave before I call security." He laughed, muttered something about me being dramatic, but I could see the anger flash behind his eyes. When he finally walked away, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Back upstairs, Donna from HR was waiting near my desk. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, but my voice cracked a little when I said he was my sister's boyfriend. She frowned. "We'll make sure you have an escort to your car for a while just to be safe." I wanted to cry, not out of fear, but because of how humiliating it was to need protection from my own family. That evening, I drove home using a different route. I noticed a dark SUV behind me for 2 blocks and took 3 turns just to be sure it wasn't following. My heart pounded until I finally pulled into my driveway and saw it continue down the street. The fear felt sticky and unfamiliar. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table again, opened my laptop, and made the decision I should have made months ago. I changed my direct deposit from my regular bank, the one everyone in the family knew, to a new account at Virginia Credit Union. It took 15 minutes to reroute everything: payroll, bills, savings. I closed the old account the next morning. When the teller asked for a reason, I said privacy. She smiled politely, unaware that privacy felt like oxygen. With that done, I decided on one more act, small but satisfying. I printed out the spreadsheet I had built, every charge and every date. Then I designed a simple cover page. Across the top, in bold font, I typed "Family Subsidy, Receipts." Underneath, I added the total: $27,480. I had it bound at the office supply store, the kind of binding people use for presentations or proposals. When the clerk handed it to me, she smiled and said, "Looks official." I smiled back. It is. That evening, I placed the binder on my coffee table and just stared at it. The weight of it felt different from guilt. It felt like documentation, like truth with pages. For the first time, I could see the shape of what they had taken, not just money, but peace. The binder wasn't revenge, not yet. It was preparation. Over the next week, I noticed the ripple effect of silence. Mom texted less. Sloane posted more quotes about forgiveness. Tyler disappeared from Facebook entirely. The church ladies still smiled too wide on Sundays, but their words softened now that they sensed I wasn't playing the same role. One afternoon, Donna stopped by my desk again. "Everything okay with your family situation?" she asked. "Getting there," I said. She nodded and handed me an envelope. Inside was a small bonus check for leading a project ahead of schedule. It wasn't much, but it felt symbolic, like the universe whispering, "Keep going." That night, I bought myself dinner from a little Thai place around the corner. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, something I hadn't done in a long time. My phone buzzed on the table. It was another post from Sloane, this one, a photo of her standing in front of a studio backdrop that looked suspiciously like a spare bedroom. The caption read, "When you lose support, find yourself." I didn't roll my eyes this time. I just saved the image. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, I glanced at the binder again. The clean white cover, the printed title, the orderly lines inside it was all too neat for the chaos it represented. Still, it was mine. I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and let the quiet settle around me. I knew the calm wouldn't last. In stories like mine, silence was never the end. It was the inhale before the storm. The rain started sometime after midnight, steady and cold against the window. It had been one of those long, sleepless nights where the hours blurred into the sound of dripping gutters and the faint hum of the fridge. I sat at the kitchen table reviewing my binder again, the neat rows of transactions illuminated by the pale blue glow of the laptop. Every line was familiar now, each dollar a memory. I had just closed the file when the sound came. 3 heavy knocks. Then silence. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. My building was usually quiet at night, the kind of silence that echoed. But then the knocking came again, harder this time, followed by a voice. "Open up. We can fix your attitude." My heart dropped. Tyler. The voice was slurred, soaked in alcohol and arrogance. I stayed completely still, my hand frozen around my phone. He pounded the door again. "Come on, Tara, I just want to talk. You can't hide forever." I looked toward the door camera. His face appeared in the grainy night vision feed, wet hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wild. My breath came shallow, but I knew what to do. I reached for my phone and opened the doorbell app, pressing record. The red dot blinked at the corner of the screen, catching every word. He leaned close to the camera, his voice lower now. "You think you're better than everyone. You think you can say no and get away with it." His hand slammed the door once more. The frame shuddered. "You'll pay for this." Then he staggered back, muttering, "Family doesn't turn on family." The words hit harder than the noise. I dialed 911. My voice shook only once. "There's a man outside my apartment. He's drunk and won't leave. He's my sister's boyfriend." The operator's tone was calm, professional. "Stay inside with the door locked. Officers are on their way." The next 10 minutes stretched like hours. I stood by the door, phone pressed to my ear, the sound of sirens faint in the distance. When the red and blue lights finally reflected through my blinds, I exhaled for the first time. The knock that followed was softer this time. "Police," a voice said. I opened the door, an inch chain still on, and showed them the phone recording. Tyler was gone. One officer walked the hallway, shining a flashlight down the stairwell. The other took my statement. I tried to keep my voice steady. "He's been harassing me for weeks," I said. "Mostly messages, but now this." The officer nodded. "You did the right thing calling. We'll file a report." Before leaving, he gave me a small card with an incident number. I set it on the counter like a trophy of unwanted reality. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, the apartment felt heavier, the kind of heavy that sinks into your bones. I sat on the couch, still in my robe, staring at the reflection of the flashing lights fading down the street. My hands trembled, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. I opened my notes app and started typing. Incident log, I wrote. Underneath 12:48 a.m. Knocking male voice identified as Tyler Briggs. Recorded via doorbell cam. Police notified at 12:51. Report filed. I added the case number from the officer's card. The act of writing calmed me. Facts were easier to hold than feelings. I didn't sleep after that. I made tea instead, the smell of chamomile filling the air. My hand still shook when I lifted the cup. Outside, the rain softened into drizzle, tapping gently against the window like it was apologizing for what had happened. Around 4, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark. My phone buzzed once more, a voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't listen. I just saved it to the folder labeled Receipts. Morning came too soon. I felt like I had aged overnight. The mirror reflected puffy eyes and exhaustion carved deep into my face. I pulled on a sweatshirt and walked to the kitchen. The stack of bills on the counter waited for me like witnesses. Dominion Energy overdue. HOA fine for late trash pickup, $75. Both reminders of how much of my money had been drained for other people's comfort. I paid what I could, each click of the mouse, a small rebellion against the chaos. My checking account balance shrank, but at least this time it was my choice. Later that day, my phone lit up again, Mom. I hesitated, then let it ring out. A few seconds later, a message appeared. Tyler told us you called the police. That was unnecessary. He was just trying to talk. You've humiliated your sister. I stared at the text until my vision blurred. The audacity almost made me laugh. He had shown up drunk, pounding my door, and somehow I was the problem. I typed back, "I'm fine. Please stop defending me." Then I deleted it before sending. Silence was safer. By evening, fatigue hit me hard. I lay on the couch with the TV on mute, the sound of rain replaced by the low hum of traffic. The doorbell notification pinged again, and my chest tightened. But this time, it was just the mailman. A small envelope slid under the door with no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. 3 words printed in messy handwriting. "I regret this." My hands clenched the page until it crumpled. I checked the hallway. Empty. I locked the door again and double-checked the chain. I sat back down, breathing slow, with fear finally catching up. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. Not the kind of alone that comes from being single or independent, but the kind that feels like exile. I realized then that this was the cost of boundaries, the loneliness that follows courage. But beneath it, something else was forming, something like resolve. I reached for my phone, opened my banking app, and took screenshots of every payment linked to Sloane's name. Then I wrote a new note under the incident log, "Evidence escalates pattern. Keep documenting." Around midnight, I finally closed my eyes. The city outside hummed softly, cars hissing through wet streets. My apartment smelled like tea and rain and survival. The fear was still there, coiled quiet inside me, but so was a strange calm. I had faced the storm and was still standing. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the moment before everything changed. The morning after the storm felt eerily calm, the kind of quiet that makes you listen harder. The sky over Richmond was pale gray, the streets still wet from last night's rain. I poured coffee into a chipped mug and stared at my reflection in the dark liquid. I looked tired but focused. Something had shifted. Fear had burned itself out and left behind clarity. I opened my laptop and began searching for legal aid near me. That was how I found Marisol Vega, a lawyer known for handling small business fraud and family financial abuse cases. Her office was 10 minutes from downtown. When I called, her assistant said she can see you this afternoon. Bring everything. I looked at the binder on my coffee table. I had everything. Marisol's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and determination. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice that made you feel like nothing was too messy to fix. She listened while I explained everything from the Comcast bills to the credit inquiries and the midnight knocking. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she tapped her pen lightly against the folder. "You've documented all of this?" she asked. I slid the binder across the desk. She flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "This is gold," she said. "You've done half my job already." She began outlining a plan in a tone so steady, it felt like a life raft. "First, we freeze your credit, all 3 bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. That stops any new accounts from being opened. Then we issue a fraud alert to flag your name. I'll also send cease and desist letters to anyone who's accessed your credit without authorization." I took notes even though she had it all memorized. The words sounded like armor being fitted piece by piece. "What about the night he came here?" I asked. "That she said is grounds for a protective order. You have a recording and a 911 log. We'll file for a temporary order today. You don't have to face them alone again." My throat tightened with relief. "And the money?" I asked quietly. $27,480 to be exact. She smiled slightly. "That's where your affidavit comes in. You'll write it, we'll notarize it, and it becomes your official record. You may never see all of it back, but you'll have the truth in writing." By the time I left her office, the clouds had broken apart and sunlight fell across the pavement like permission. I stopped by a notary on the way home and signed my name on every page of the affidavit. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming territory. At Virginia Credit Union, I met with a teller named James who helped me lock down everything. "Let's start clean," he said, typing quickly. We set up a new account for my paycheck and added 2-factor authentication. Then we closed the old family-linked account permanently. "Anyone else listed on your previous accounts?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said. He smiled. "Good. You'd be surprised how often people let relatives stay authorized. It never ends well." I almost laughed at how perfectly he understood. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the Comcast portal one last time. My mother's address was still listed under my account, a quiet drain I had ignored for too long. I clicked cancel, confirmed twice, and watched the spinning wheel until the screen said, "Account closed." The confirmation email arrived seconds later. I printed it, slid it into an envelope, and addressed it to our family group chat. I didn't send a text with it, no caption, no explanation, just mailed the paper itself. Proof plain and silent. It was a small act, but deeply satisfying. That evening, I met Marisol again for the protective order filing. The courthouse was colder than I expected, all marble and fluorescent light. I sat across from her at the clerk's counter, signing forms that would keep distance between me and the people who once called themselves my family. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Boundaries are the most misunderstood form of love." I nodded, unsure whether to laugh or cry. When I got home that night, I placed all the new documents in the binder and added a fresh divider labeled legal. I poured a glass of wine and stared at the cover. The total on the front, $27,480, no longer looked like a loss. It looked like a receipt of survival. My phone buzzed around 9. Mom, of course. "Your sister's upset." Her message began. "You're making things harder than they need to be. Tyler says you're spreading lies." I took a photo of the legal envelope and sent it back. "Tell Tyler to contact my lawyer," I typed. She didn't reply. Later that night, as I was washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the window again. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone who had finally decided to stop apologizing. I said the words aloud just to hear them in the quiet apartment. "Family isn't a bank. It's accountability." The sentence echoed softly off the walls, and I realized it sounded truer than anything I had ever said to them. Before bed, I checked my email one last time. A message from Equifax confirmed my credit freeze. Experian followed a few minutes later, then TransUnion. 3 separate locks, 3 invisible shields. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. The room felt lighter. The world outside hadn't changed, but I had. The next morning, I found another voicemail from Sloan. Her voice was sharp brittle. "You didn't have to make it this serious. Lawyers, really, you're ruining everything." I deleted it without listening to the rest. I didn't need to. I had all the words I needed documented already. That afternoon, I stopped by the post office again to mail certified copies of my affidavit to the credit bureaus. As the clerk stamped each envelope, I thought about how strange justice looks in real life. It doesn't roar. It arrives in paperwork and patience. When I walked back to my car, the wind picked up, scattering a few brown leaves across the sidewalk. I didn't rush. For once, time was on my side. That evening, I sat on the couch, turned on the lamp, and flipped through the binder again. Every section told a story. Bills, messages, proof. It was no longer just evidence of pain. It was a map out of it. I poured another glass of wine and looked at the clock. It was only 9, but I felt like the day had lasted a lifetime. I turned off my phone, set it face down, and let the quiet stretch. For the first time, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt earned. The courtroom was colder than I expected, its air heavy with disinfectant and tension. Rows of wooden benches stretched behind me, mostly empty, except for a few curious faces from other hearings. I sat beside Marisol at the petitioner's table, my binder neatly stacked in front of me like armor. Across the aisle sat Tyler and Sloan. He wore a wrinkled suit that looked borrowed, eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Sloan looked smaller than I remembered. Her confidence wilted, her makeup forced into composure. Mom was nowhere in sight. Maybe she thought staying away was loyalty to both sides, or maybe she couldn't bear to face what this had become. Judge Ellison entered promptly at 9:30. His tone was firm, professional, and without sympathy for drama. Case number 24, 1098, he said. Protective order hearing petitioner Miss Tara Quinn. The clerk motioned for us to stand, and my knees wobbled slightly. When I took my seat again, Marisol leaned over. "You've already done the hardest part," she whispered. "Just breathe." The judge began by reviewing the evidence I had submitted. First the 911 call transcript, then the video from my doorbell. The courtroom was silent as the recording played Tyler's drunken voice filling the space. "Open up. We can fix your attitude." His face appeared on the monitor, distorted by the night vision glow. Then came the words that sealed it. "You'll pay for this." The sound of it echoed longer than it should have. Tyler looked down at his hands. Judge Ellison cleared his throat. "That's sufficient. Protective order is granted for 1 year, renewable upon review." He looked at Tyler directly. "Mr. Briggs, you are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Ms. Quinn. Violation will result in arrest. Do you understand?" Tyler nodded stiffly. His lawyer, a young man who looked barely out of school, murmured something in his ear. The judge turned to Marisol. "Anything else, counsel?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said, rising with quiet confidence. "My client has prepared an affidavit summarizing a pattern of financial exploitation that led to this harassment. I'd like to read it into the record." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marisol opened the folder and began reading. Her voice was steady, clear and devastating. Affidavit of financial exploitation. Tara Quinn, sworn and notarized. Total losses over 4 years, $27,480. Itemized as follows. She began listing them one by one. Comcast internet payments, $890. Uber rides for family members estimated at $375. Costco purchases totaling $1,420. Credit inquiries linked to unauthorized attempts 2. Fraudulent furniture order denied but recorded. Each number hit like a small hammer. Additional amounts include medical copays, shared utilities, and charges for household items, candles, decor, and streaming services, all tied to accounts opened in Ms. Quinn's name. She paused before adding, "Each line is supported by receipts, screenshots, or verified bank statements." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You kept documentation for all of this?" I nodded. "Every dollar," I said quietly. A murmur ran through the small courtroom. Even the clerk seemed impressed. Marisol closed the binder. "In addition to the harassment, Your Honor, this pattern represents a sustained attempt to control my client financially under the guise of family obligation. She is requesting acknowledgement of these records for any future civil claim." The judge leaned back, acknowledged, and entered into record. He looked at me then, not unkindly. "Ms. Quinn, you've shown remarkable composure. Most people don't come this prepared." I managed a small nod, my throat tight. "Thank you, Your Honor." When the session ended, I stood slowly, knees trembling again, but this time from release, not fear. Tyler stormed out first, muttering under his breath. Sloan followed, head down her heels, clicking too fast against the tile. Marisol gathered the papers calmly. "They'll need time to realize it's over," she said, "and you'll need time to believe it." Outside, the air was crisp and bright, the kind of autumn day that made the city look freshly washed. I stood on the courthouse steps, sunlight catching the gold letters on the binder. I felt lighter now, not because the debt disappeared, but because the burden finally had witnesses. The effects began rent delinquency. I told him politely that I was no longer involved. A week later, Sloan texted, "They're threatening eviction. You happy now?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Actions have consequences. She didn't answer. At work, the opposite was happening. My manager, Mr. Riley, stopped by my desk one morning. "I heard from HR about what you've been dealing with," he said. "We're assigning you as project lead for the new client. You've earned it." The promotion came with a small bonus, just enough to cover my late utilities and maybe buy something nice for once. That weekend, I treated myself to dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. I sat alone at a corner table eating pasta that didn't come from a microwave. I watched other families laugh and clink glasses and felt something strange, peace, not envy. A week later, Marisol called with one more update. Judge Ellison filed the protective order with local police and the credit bureaus. It's fully enforced now. You can rest. I thanked her and hung up, leaning back in my chair. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the heater. The quiet no longer felt like absence. It felt earned. That night, I opened my binder again, flipping through the sections. I added a new tab labeled Aftermath. Under it, I wrote Tyler employment flagged, Sloan rent overdue, Tara promotion secured. I underlined the words slowly, deliberately. For the first time, the math of my life finally balanced. The next morning, as I left for work, I paused at the door and glanced back at the binder resting on the table. It didn't look like evidence anymore. It looked like closure, bound in plastic. I smiled faintly, whispered to the empty apartment. "We're even now." Then I locked the door behind me and stepped into the bright, cold morning, the weight on my shoulders finally lighter than my purse. July 4th arrived heavy with humidity and the scent of charcoal drifting through Church Hill. The neighborhood pulsed with laughter and the crack of early fireworks. I almost skipped Aunt June's annual barbecue, but Marisol had smiled when I told her about the invitation. "Closure doesn't always come in court," she'd said. "Sometimes it comes when everyone finally sees the truth." So I went. I wore a blue sundress, simple and unremarkable, and carried a brown envelope tucked under my arm, the same binder, now slimmer, reorganized, ready for daylight. When I walked into the backyard, the air buzzed with conversation and cicadas. Red plastic cups clinked. Someone had set up a long folding table covered in checkered cloth and paper plates, and there, right in the center, was Sloan's display. A large whiteboard propped against a chair read, "Family-backed studio." Underneath, she'd taped photos of her art, half of which I recognized as prints she hadn't made herself. Tyler was by the grill tongs in one hand, beer in the other, grinning too widely. "Look who decided to show up," he said loud enough for half the yard to hear. "Our family accountant. You missed the soft launch." "Looks like I'm just in time," I said evenly, setting the envelope on the picnic table. Sloan's eyes flicked toward it, a small tremor crossing her smile. "What's that?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Documentation," I said, "of everything." The chatter around us dimmed curiosity, spreading like a ripple. Aunt June, ever the peacemaker, stepped closer. "Now, Tara, let's not spoil the holiday. I'm not here to spoil anything I said. I'm here to finish it." I opened the envelope and began laying out pages. First came the printed screenshots, Zelle transfers labeled gas copay and Uber rides. Then the Costco receipts itemized and dated. Next, the Comcast account closure notice, crisp and official. I unfolded the court order, the one bearing Judge Ellison's signature, and placed it on top of the pile. Finally, I set down a printed image from Sloan's Facebook post, the one that read, "Some people forget blood. This," I said quietly, "is what forgetting looks like." The yard had gone still except for the hiss of the grill. Sloan's cheeks flushed deep red. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising. "You've been keeping files on your own family." "No," I replied. "I've been keeping records on theft." Tyler laughed too loudly, waving his tongs like a weapon of mockery. "She's exaggerating. She's always been dramatic." He turned toward the crowd. "We all help each other. Isn't that what families do?" Aunt June, who had been silent until then, stepped forward and picked up one of the pages. She squinted, reading aloud the first line she saw. "It's just family." Her eyes lifted to Sloane. "You actually wrote this on a loan request." The murmur that followed spread fast. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, a few whispering. Someone near the drinks table muttered, "That's low." Tyler opened his mouth to defend her, but just then a small firecracker misfired near the patio, popping loud enough to make everyone jump. The burst sent sparks into the air, cutting him off mid-sentence. Every head turned his way. The timing was perfect, absurd, almost cinematic. I couldn't help but smile. He stammered, trying to regain his footing. "This isn't what it looks like," he said weakly. "It looks like accountability," I said, pouring myself a glass of sweet tea from the cooler. My hand didn't shake. I sat down at the picnic table, crossing one leg over the other. "I'm done funding abuse." My voice carried farther than I intended. The words hung there, simple and final. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Aunt June cleared her throat. "Well," she said, setting down the page, "seems some people have been confused about the meaning of family." A few guests nodded quietly. Others avoided Sloane's gaze altogether. She blinked rapidly as if trying to cry on cue, but nothing came. "You've embarrassed me," she hissed under her breath. "You embarrassed yourself," I said softly. Tyler's smirk vanished when someone from the neighborhood, Mr. Dillard, the retired police officer, stepped closer. "You the one with the restraining order?" he asked bluntly. Tyler's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." "Seems like it's everyone's business now," Mr. Dillard said, folding his arms. The conversation that followed turned awkwardly polite, filled with forced smiles and people excusing themselves early. I didn't move. I sipped my tea, the ice clinking against the glass, the sweetness coating my tongue. Fireworks cracked faintly in the distance, their reflections flickering in the windows. Sloane gathered her whiteboard quietly, her movements sharp with humiliation. "You think this makes you look noble?" she whispered as she passed. "No," I said. "It makes me look free." Aunt June stayed beside me as the crowd thinned. "You handled that with more grace than I would have," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "Grace took practice." She nodded. "Let them stew. People like that don't change until the mirror gets loud enough." She glanced at the binder. "That's one loud mirror." Later, as the evening deepened, the sky turned a deep indigo streaked with fireworks. The last guests drifted home, leaving behind half-empty bottles of soda and the faint scent of burnt sparklers. I helped Aunt June gather the trash. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than I've been in years," I said. "Feels like breathing after holding it too long." She gave my arm a squeeze. "You earned it." When I finally left, the air was cooler and the streets shimmered under streetlights. From a few houses away, I heard laughter music, the sound of families celebrating. It didn't sting the way it used to. I drove home with the windows cracked, the wind tangling my hair. The binder sat in the passenger seat, the word receipts barely visible under the dim glow of the dashboard light. I didn't feel pride exactly. I felt peace, and that was better. When I reached my apartment, I placed the binder on the shelf by the window. It no longer needed to be opened or guarded. It had done its job. I made another glass of sweet tea, sat by the window, and watched the final bursts of fireworks bloom and fade across the skyline. The loudest ones sounded far away, like echoes of an ending that had already happened. I whispered softly to the empty room, "Freedom isn't loud. It's quiet and complete." Then I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the night settle into silence. 2 weeks after the barbecue, the knock came again. This time it was softer, hesitant, almost rehearsed. The sun was setting over the Richmond skyline, and the light through my blinds painted thin gold bars across the floor. I hesitated before opening the door. Sloane stood there, clutching a worn leather bag to her chest. Behind her, Mom hovered in the hallway. Arms folded, her expression a mixture of guilt and stubbornness. For a second, no one spoke. Then Sloane tried for a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We just want to talk," she said. I stepped aside wordlessly and let them in. The air smelled faintly of jasmine tea and the quiet order I had built for myself. Sloane sat on the edge of the couch, twisting her hands together. Mom chose the armchair, her eyes scanning the apartment, like she was searching for signs of weakness. "You look thinner," she said. "Are you eating enough?" It was such a classic deflection that I almost laughed. "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Why are you here?" Sloane exhaled shakily. "We need your help." "The studio, well, the landlord gave us a notice. 2 weeks to pay or vacate, and the credit card is maxed. Tyler lost his job, something about his background check coming up dirty." I stayed silent. Mom jumped in. "You could fix this, Tara. Just one signature. Help your sister save her dream. You have good credit, a steady job. You can make this right for her." The words hung between us like stale perfume. I stood and walked to my desk. From the top drawer, I pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a check or a loan form. It was a list printed neatly in black ink. "Here," I said, handing it to Sloane. She frowned, scanning the page. "Credit counseling services, local legal aid Goodwill Job Center, small business debt recovery hotline. All free." She looked up, eyes wide. "This isn't what I asked for." "It's what you need," I replied. Mom's voice sharpened. "Don't do this. You're punishing her." I met her gaze without blinking. "No. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference." The silence stretched heavy with everything we had never said. Then Sloane's composure cracked. "You're heartless," she whispered. "I'm your sister. I just need one last chance." "My answer is no," I said, calm and final. "You've had plenty of chances. You used my name, my money, my peace. Now you can use your own." Sloane's lips trembled. "We could be homeless." "Then talk to the resources on that list," I said. "They help people who've made mistakes, just like you." Mom stood abruptly, anger flashing across her face. "You think you're better than us because you have a paycheck and some fancy binder. You're still part of this family. Not in the way you mean it," I said quietly. "Family isn't entitlement, it's accountability." Sloane's tears finally came, but they were more frustration than sorrow. "Fine," she said, grabbing her bag. "Don't help, but don't think this makes you righteous." She stormed out, her footsteps sharp against the tile. Mom lingered at the door, her voice low. "You'll regret turning your back on blood." I shook my head. "No, I regret waiting this long." When the door closed, the apartment felt larger. I poured myself a glass of water, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. I didn't cry. I just sat there listening to the echo of my own breathing, the faint hum of the city beyond the window. For the first time, I felt the full weight of freedom. It was heavy, but it was mine. Over the next few days, the consequences unfolded on their own. Marisol called to tell me Tyler's company had officially terminated his contract. "Protective orders show up on background checks," she said. "They can't keep him in a client-facing position." I thanked her, though there was nothing celebratory in my tone. Justice doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes it just tastes real. Meanwhile, Sloane's landlord followed through on the eviction notice. Aunt June mentioned it quietly at church. "She's moving out by the end of the month," she whispered. The neighbors complained about noise and late rent. "It's a mess." I nodded but said nothing. People reap what they cultivate. Then came the GoFundMe. One morning, a coworker forwarded me a link with the subject line, "Is this your sister?" The page title read, "Help Save My Art Studio." Sloane had written a long, self-pitying post about being betrayed by family and facing eviction due to bad luck. The goal was $10,000. She'd already raised $200. The comments were full of sympathy until one caught my eye. It was from an anonymous user who had posted a photo of a Costco receipt and a caption, "Didn't this studio spend family money on candles?" Another commenter followed with a screenshot of an Uber log showing rides labeled Mom. Within hours, the tone shifted. The donations froze. By evening, the page was deleted. That night, I opened my binder and added a new tab, Fallout. Under it, I wrote short notes. Tyler terminated. Sloane evicted. GoFundMe deleted. It wasn't joy I felt, just symmetry. Every action had found its echo. The following week, I took my last small step. Marisol had told me about the small claims process in Virginia, simple and clean. I filled out the forms attaching proof of $1, $200 I had paid over the past year for internet and late fees tied to Mom's address. The clerk at the courthouse stamped it with practiced indifference. Hearing in 30 days, she said. When the date arrived, Sloan didn't even try to contest it. She sat across the small courtroom looking smaller than ever while the judge reviewed the paperwork. Defendant agrees to repay in installments of $100 per month, he ruled. Case closed. She signed the papers without looking at me. I thanked the judge, folded the document neatly, and left without a backward glance. As I stepped into the sunlight outside, the air smelled faintly of rain again. It struck me that everything had begun on a rainy morning 2 months ago, with a single message on my phone. Sign the loan for me. It's just family. The irony was almost poetic. That evening, I walked home from work instead of driving. The streets were quiet, the sky turning orange at the edges. I passed the corner cafe where I used to meet Sloan for coffee when things were still bearable. The tables were full of strangers, laughing, living lives untouched by obligation or deceit. I envied them for only a second. Then I realized I was one of them now. At home, I placed the new court document in my binder. The collection was nearly complete. On the final page, I wrote in neat letters, "Debt settled, lessons permanent." Then I closed the cover for good. I made tea and stood by the window, watching the lights flicker across the James River. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks from another event burst briefly in the sky. I thought of Sloan packing boxes, of Tyler explaining away his record to a potential employer, of Mom rehearsing excuses at church. And then I thought of myself still standing, still whole. I smiled faintly, not from triumph, but from relief. Boundaries may have cost me a family, but they bought me peace. And peace, I had learned, was worth every receipt. The morning light in Richmond had a softer hue in late summer, the kind that slid gently across the blinds and made the apartment look warmer than it was. I woke without an alarm. No buzzing phone, no late-night texts asking for favors, no Zelle notifications blinking red, just quiet. I stretched, feeling the stillness of a life finally balanced, and walked to the balcony. The potted rosemary I had bought 2 weeks ago sat by the railing, its scent fresh and grounding. I brushed my fingers over its leaves, and the fragrance lingered on my skin. Below, a neighbor's dog barked, and somewhere in the distance, the faint rumble of a train drifted from the James River. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was behind on something. I wasn't owed. I didn't owe. Everything was in its small way even. I spent the weekend cleaning, not the desperate kind of cleaning people do to distract from chaos, but the quiet kind that makes space for peace. I folded laundry, wiped counters, watered plants. Every drawer I organized felt like reclaiming another inch of my life. The binder, once my armor, now rested closed on a shelf beside the rosemary. I hadn't opened it in weeks. I didn't need to. Its weight had already served its purpose. A few days later, I took a short trip to Virginia Beach. It wasn't planned. I just packed a small bag, booked a cheap motel, and drove until I smelled salt in the air. The ocean was gray that morning, the sand cool under my feet. I walked along the shore with a paper cup of drip coffee from a beachside diner, the kind that costs $2 but tastes like calm. I sat on a weathered bench, sipping slowly, watching the seagulls pick at crumbs. The simplicity of it all felt like luxury. For so long, I had measured worth by what I could give or lose. Now it was measured by quiet moments like this. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. It was a voicemail. I waited until the coffee was gone before listening. Mom's voice, thin and uncertain, filled my ear. "Tara." I just wanted to say, "We'll do better. I know things went too far. I hope you're okay." There was a pause, the sound of her sigh. "Anyway, take care of yourself." I didn't delete it. I also didn't call back. Some things don't need replies to find closure. Sometimes silence says enough. When I returned home, a small white envelope sat in my mailbox. The return address read Church Hill HOA. My first thought was dread, another fine, another rule I had unknowingly broken. I opened it slowly, standing by the mailroom light. Inside was a short printed note. Dear Ms. Quinn, we appreciate your consistent compliance with trash collection guidelines for the past 3 months. Thank you for maintaining the community standard. I stared at it for a second, then started laughing. Not a bitter laugh, but a genuine one, the kind that breaks through tension like sunlight. 3 months of putting the trash out on time, and suddenly I was a model resident. I leaned against the wall, still smiling. Order really does come back one bin at a time, I murmured to myself. That small moment, ridiculous as it was, felt like the universe's quiet nod. After everything, the betrayals, the courtrooms, the accusations, life was now measured by simple order, by the satisfaction of doing ordinary things without interference. Peace didn't arrive with a parade. It crept in through routines, through the sound of a kettle boiling, the smell of rosemary, the hum of a refrigerator at night. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea as the city lights flickered awake. Across the street, a family laughed around their grill. The laughter didn't sting anymore. It just sounded human. My thoughts drifted to Sloan and Mom, to whatever their days looked like now. Maybe they were struggling. Maybe they were learning. Either way, it wasn't mine to carry. Everyone has to balance their own ledger eventually. I thought back to the first night of the storm when Tyler had pounded on my door and the fear had nearly broken me. It felt like another lifetime. That fear had turned into strength in slow increments disguised as paperwork, as boundaries, as polite refusals. It hadn't been a movie ending. It had been a series of small, stubborn choices, and now the sum of them was peace. As the sky deepened, the train whistle echoed faintly again, long and low. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool air, the scent of rosemary and rain. Peace didn't roar, I whispered to myself. It arrived like a receipt paid in full. The words felt right, like an ending that didn't need fanfare. I went inside, turned off the lights, and let the quiet fill the space completely. No voices, no chaos, no guilt, just the hum of a life that finally belonged to me. Somewhere out there, people were still learning their lessons, still writing their apologies. But mine was already written, sealed, and filed away. The story was done, and for once it didn't end with revenge. It ended with respect, reclaimed boundaries intact, and a kind of justice that didn't need noise to be real. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I didn't dream of arguments or debts or unfinished conversations. I dreamed of sunlight on water, the scent of rosemary in the breeze, and the soft click of balance being restored.